We express shock and outrage when politicians reveal themselves as cunning, deceptive operators, but this reaction exposes our own naivety. Strip away that childish indignation. When you find yourself consumed by moral outrage at political maneuvering, you need to steel yourself with the unflinching wisdom of Niccolò Machiavelli. This late 15th century political advisor and philosopher, a man who observed power's true mechanics in the brutal Italian Renaissance, delivered a truth most people lack the stomach to accept. Politicians who lie, who scheme, who operate in shadows are not automatically corrupt or evil simply because they've abandoned the comfortable morality of ordinary citizens. That's the delusion of those who've never carried the weight of genuine responsibility. Machiavelli's revolutionary insight cuts deeper than surface-level ethics. A truly effective politician isn't measured by how pleasant, transparent, or virtuous they appear in drawing rooms and public forums. No, the measure of political excellence rests on a far more demanding standard. Can they defend the state against its enemies? Can they enrich its coffers and expand its prosperity? Can they elevate its standing and secure its honor on the world stage? These are the questions that matter, objectives of profound importance that transcend the petty moral scorekeeping of those who've never had to make impossible choices. The politician who achieves these vital aims, even if their methods occasionally venture into morally ambiguous territory, even if they must sometimes operate through darkness and tactical deception, serves a higher purpose than the honest fool who leads his nation to ruin with clean hands. Understand this fundamental truth. Pleasantness and niceness may serve you well in your private life, but these are not the primary virtues citizens require from those who command nations. What the people desperately need, whether they consciously recognize it or not, is effectiveness, raw, undeniable results. And achieving those results frequently demands that a leader reach into the arsenal of darker, more ruthless tactics that would make the average person recoil. Once you grasp this non-negotiable requirement of governance, you'll stop wallowing in naive disappointment every election cycle. You'll develop the clarity and hard-nosed realism necessary to evaluate what you actually want from those who wield power over your nation's destiny. Niccolò Machiavelli entered this world in Florence in 1469. Born into a family of modest means, his father practiced law. The young Machiavelli received a rigorous formal education, and his intellect earned him his first significant position as secretary to the Florentine government. But fate had harsh lessons waiting for him. Shortly after his appointment, Florence erupted in political chaos. The Medici family, who had dominated the city for 6 decades, were violently expelled. What followed were decades of relentless political instability and bloodshed that would forge Machiavelli's understanding of power's brutal realities. His career became a roller coaster of dramatic reversals that would have broken lesser men. Over the span of mere decades, he ascended from influential diplomatic envoy to moderately successful military commander, only to plummet to the status of state enemy. When the Medici clawed their way back to power, Machiavelli was seized, subjected to torture, and ultimately cast into exile. His political career ended in spectacular failure. Yet here's what separates the truly great from the forgotten. Although Machiavelli failed as a practicing politician, he achieved immortality through intellectual dominance. His 2 masterworks, The Prince and The Discourses, ensured his legacy would tower over the petty politicians who destroyed him. Want to know the harsh truth? In these texts, Machiavelli confronted a central, uncomfortable reality that politicians and citizens alike desperately wish to avoid. It is virtually impossible to be simultaneously an effective politician and a good person by traditional Christian moral standards. This truth makes people squirm, but denying it doesn't make it disappear. Machiavelli declared with unflinching clarity that a competent prince bears one overwhelming, sacred responsibility above all others: defend the state from both external enemies and internal threats to stable governance. Everything must be subordinated to this imperative. This means the prince must master the art of warfare, certainly. But more critically, he must become a virtuoso in understanding human nature, the psychology of reputation, the architecture of fear and loyalty, the precise calibration of perception management among those who serve him. The people must never perceive him as soft, pliable, or easy to disobey. That path leads to chaos and the collapse of order, but neither should they find him so vicious and cruel that he becomes disgusting to his own society, breeding resentment and rebellion. The ideal prince projects an aura of unapproachable strictness, tempered by calculated reasonableness. He must be feared, but not hated. Love or fear, choose wisely. When Machiavelli examined the question of whether a prince should pursue being loved or feared, he acknowledged that in some theoretical paradise, a leader might enjoy both love and obedience simultaneously. But we don't govern in paradise, we govern in the mud and blood of reality. Therefore, a prince must always err decisively on the side of inspiring terror. Why? Because fear, properly wielded, is what ultimately keeps human beings in check. Love is fickle, conditional, and evaporates the moment sacrifice is required. Fear endures. Machiavelli proposed that an effective leader must master what he called virtù, a concept vastly different from the emasculated notion of virtue preached from church pulpits. Machiavelli's virtù for politicians encompasses wisdom, strategic brilliance, physical and mental strength, unflinching bravery, and when circumstances absolutely demand it, calculated ruthlessness. At one particularly provocative moment, Machiavelli deployed the deliberately shocking phrase criminal virtue to describe the essential capability of leaders to inflict cruelty in service of the state while simultaneously remaining good as leaders. This isn't a contradiction, it's a necessary duality. But Machiavelli wasn't advocating for mindless savagery. He established clear criteria for when a dose of criminal virtue becomes justified and necessary. Any violence must be strictly essential for the security and stability of the state, never gratuitous, never for personal satisfaction. It must be executed swiftly and decisively, often under cover of darkness, Machiavelli counseled. And critically, it must not be repeated so frequently that the leader develops a reputation for mindless brutality, which breeds rebellion rather than order. The masterclass, Cesare Borgia. Machiavelli offered the example of his contemporary, Cesare Borgia, a man he genuinely admired as someone who understood precisely how to be tough without crossing into counterproductive cruelty. Though we might reasonably question Machiavelli's criteria when examining what follows, when Cesare conquered the city of Cesena, he appointed one of his mercenary commanders, Ramiro de Lorca, to impose order on the chaotic region. Ramiro executed this mandate through methods of breathtaking brutality. Men were beheaded in front of their terrified wives and children. Property was seized without ceremony. Traitors were castrated as public spectacles of what happens to those who defy authority. The region achieved order, but at a cost that threatened to make Cesare permanently hated. So Cesare made a brilliant, ruthless calculation. He turned on Ramiro himself, had him sliced in half, and displayed the bisected corpse in the public square. The message was unmistakable. I am the true master here, and I will not tolerate excess even from my own instruments of power. But then, and this is where Cesare demonstrated true mastery that was enough bloodshed, he immediately pivoted. He slashed taxes, imported cheap grain to feed the people, constructed a theater for entertainment, and organized a series of magnificent festivals designed to give the population something beautiful to focus on, deliberately drowning out the unfortunate memories of recent violence. Machiavelli noted this sequence with clear approval. This was virtue in action, the precise calibration of force and benevolence required to govern effectively. The Catholic Church banned Machiavelli's works for 200 years, and for good reason. He had argued with devastating force that being a good Christian was fundamentally incompatible with being an effective leader. The Church recognized the existential threat this posed to their moral authority over political affairs. But even for those of us who aren't politicians, atheists, believers, business people, parents, Machiavelli's insights cut to the bone of human existence. He understood and articulated a truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. We cannot be good at, or good for, all things simultaneously. This limitation exists not merely because of our finite abilities and resources, but because of fundamental conflicts embedded within moral codes themselves. The fields we choose to operate in, whether politics, business, or even family life, will inevitably require what we euphemistically call difficult decisions. Strip away that comfortable language and confront what we're really describing: ethical trade-offs, necessary compromises with our idealized vision of ourselves. You may have to sacrifice neo-Christian fantasies of universal kindness for the sake of practical effectiveness in your domain. You may have to lie, yes, lie to keep a crucial relationship intact. You may have to ignore or override the feelings of certain employees to prevent a business from collapsing, taking dozens of livelihoods down with it. And that, Machiavelli insists with unflinching honesty, is the non-negotiable price of dealing with the world as it actually is, rather than indulging in how we wish it should be. The world has continued to simultaneously love and hate Machiavelli across 5 centuries for one reason: he forces our attention onto the uncomfortable, often unbearable tension between two things we desperately want to possess together but perhaps cannot: effectiveness and kindness, power and niceness, results and moral purity. He makes us choose, and that choice reveals who we really are. If this breakdown of Machiavellian power hit you hard, subscribe to the channel right now. Drop a comment below with the toughest leadership decision you've ever faced. And hit that like button if you're ready to face reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. More hard truths coming your way, don't miss them.